In the last 7 years, I've been fired from the White House. I sold a piece of my business to a fraud. That's an embarrassment for me. That hurt my reputation, hurt my business, but I'm still here.
This is breaking news. President Trump has removed Anthony Scaramucci.
10 days on the job. That makes Anthony Scaramucci the shortest communications director in the history of the White House.
And we're in a post-truth world, Jeff, where you can't tell the truth anymore because people don't believe it.
This is a country of entrepreneurs and risk takers, so policies and politics really, really matter, Jeff. It infuses and infects every part of your life.
I'm wondering if you're open to, and I realize it's awkward to ask you this publicly, but there is a demand from the audience right now for people that have had up close proximity to Donald Trump to kind of tell us what's true and what isn't.
So Trump...
We've officially gone where this podcast has never gone before.
Welcome to another episode of Unlock Your Potential. This is Jeff Lerner, your host, always so riveted to be back with you, having amazing conversations with amazing humans. And today is one that I'm especially excited about. We are joined by Anthony Scaramucci, man who was famously fired from the White House, I believe after 11 days. We'll click into that story.
11 days. Thank you for not saying 10. Some people say 10, Jeff, and it hurts my feelings. So I appreciate you getting...
Oh, no, you earned every one of those days and deserve full credit, man. Just a little bit of context for the audience. So Anthony comes from the world of finance, founder and managing partner of Skybridge, a global alternative investment firm, founder and chairman of SALT, Thought Leadership Forum and Venture Studio. I won't read you his entire bio. I'll just tell you that it reads like a very interesting, twisting, turning, but generally impressively upward track of life in high finance.
Lots of bumps, Jeffrey. Lots of bumps, but yes, I mean, it's a life that happens to you when you're planning something else. I was probably planning a smoother, easier life, but it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, so it looks like you did kind of the thing launched, I would say, from a Goldman stint, as many people do, and then went out off on your own. And I'll just sort of crown it by saying that he's been ranked on multiple lists as one of the top influencers in crypto, also one of the most powerful people in global finance, sits on the Council on Foreign Relations. That's one that I think a lot of people have as a reference point, which means he's involved in all manner of international conspiracies that I'm sure we'll get into, right? The CFR, right?
Oh, yeah. Another big problem with social media today with the separating. We're in a post-truth world, Jeff.
Oh, yeah.
So we gotta, you can't tell the truth anymore because people don't believe it,
Well, and they don't click on it. They don't pay attention to it.
Let me just say a couple of things. Okay, 9/11 was not an inside job.
Okay.
We did land on the moon, but the problem is, the vaccines probably did cause more injury than people want to admit. Mm-hmm. And you probably had more than one assassin for the JFK situation. So what ends up happening is you get a couple of things that there's some truth in it, and then everybody goes crazy with everything. But, we got to calm down. We got to try to get back to a truth society again, I hope.
Amen. Well, let's make this a starting point. I want to set just a quick moment of context for the audience that has this history with me. This show has probably appeared overtly non-political, although in reality, it's just a simple matter of focus that this show, we'd probably be a bigger show if we would have a narrower mandate and stick to it. But at the end of the day, I started this show as a research project into what are kind of the universal immutable laws of human success in ostensibly a free world where people can rise. And it's been a research project in that regard. And so to the extent that I actually think a lot of success comes from ignoring politics and generally ignoring things we aren't really in control of and focusing on things we can control and keeping our heads down and doing the work, that's why we tend not to talk about that. But this episode, I don't know where we'll go here with Anthony, but I'm anticipating we might start treading into new territory for the show. But I'm actually excited about it because I actually think we live in a world now where you kind of can't ignore the macro forces in the world and responsibly be plotting your own success path in it. And so this may be the moment when the show becomes a little more expressly not just political, but just sort of, taking a viewpoint on big forces and big trends in the world that I think are becoming impossible to ignore as the individual person tries to scrap through and build the life they want. So on that note, Anthony, welcome to the show. Very excited to have you.
So first of all, thank you for the introduction, and obviously you're brilliant, and congratulations on the show. But I want to say something about politics for a second, and I hope people won't be bored by me saying this. They should really listen to this. It infuses and infects every part of your life. Okay, so in other words, if the politicians decide there's going to be a vaccine mandate and you can't get on an airplane unless you take the vaccine, guess what? That affects your life. If they decide certain laws are going to be in place, well, then you have to abide by those laws. Otherwise, you could lose your freedom, right? Yeah. And so I'm going to take people back existentially for a second. And I would believe it's probably true about your family, but I can tell you it's certainly true about my family, Jeff. My life and the arc of my life doesn't happen in any other country other than America. I got my daughter, she's a singer, and so she needed Italian citizenship, so I had to get mine in order to get hers. And so, make a long story short, they traced my family tree back 200 years, okay? And through the Napoleonic Code and the Kingdom of Naples, they were able to tell me who and what my grandparents did. Okay, ready? Peasant farmer, day worker. When you got back to the 1790s, feudal farmer, which means one of my great-grandparents was working more or less as a slave on some lord's farm in southern Italy. So to go from that location with that life to America and to have my parents and grandparents work as hard as they did to give me the opportunity that I have, it only happens in America. So when people talk about politics, you have to understand something. The political system in America has allowed for large swaths of meritocracy and has allowed for the improbable rise of people. And a policy that was incredible and wasn't really fully understood at the time was the GI Bill. And so these people came out of the war. The government said, we're going to pay for your college education. There were Jews in East New York where their families, they were tailors, they were knish bakers, and they went on to become lawyers and doctors as a result of the GI Bill. There were Italians in Brooklyn that were ready to lay brick and mason, but they went on because of the GI Bill to work in places like Wall Street or accounting services or lawyers. And so policies and politics really, really matter, Jeff. And I'm telling you, the preservation of our freedom and the system of America, this great, wonderful, decentralized system where the founders said, hey, listen, I don't want anybody at the top of the food chain to be too powerful. George Washington understood this. Other founders understood this. It's created this flat structure, which has allowed us to rise at a time, Jeff, where 5.7, there's more people living under tyranny and autocracy than any time in the history of the world. We have 5.7 billion people that are living under the aegis of autocracy. And you don't have to be an anthropologist or a sociologist to understand you don't do well in those environments. Are there oligarchs that do well? Are there kleptocrats at the top of the system that do well? But the feudal farmers from southern Italy, they don't rise, okay, in systems like that.
Yeah, I mean, you said a term, decentralized. I mean, I think that is maybe an entry point into the conversation of what I see happening, which is this centralization. It's the anti-decentralization seems to be what's happening, which is, I think, fundamentally part of the problem, and it's why this conversation is becoming so relevant and impossible to ignore in any conversation about, what empowers the individual to chart their path. Like you're saying, the context matters. You could go give the peasant farmer in the feudal system all the success principles in the world. The reality is there's no opportunity for that person to apply those principles. And in the modern world, I will say I have my book behind me. If somebody reads that, it might be you might think that I have a fairly cynical view of, and you probably wouldn't be wrong, of sort of the concept of institutional structures in general, that they tend to degrade over time towards centralization, power, hierarchical domination, and ultimately probably subjugation of people at the bottom. But America has been this, beacon of possibility that does not have to be true. For at least a couple hundred years, there was generally an institution that seemed almost like the anti-institution. It was philosophically non-institutional, even though it was an institution, and that's what created this opportunity. But I think that, it seems like the world today has a certain convenient ignorance of our history and the philosophical underpinnings of that history, where it's sort of taken for granted. And I feel like we're kind of watching it slip. And I don't know it's not a two-way door. I mean, if it slips, I don't know that there's any coming back. So maybe you could, just sort of riff on what I just said and tell me, what level of
listen, I agree with a lot of what you said. I guess the only thing where I would differ with what you're saying is sloppy is good. Okay. And so to me, the messiness of a democracy, the messiness of the Congress, where they try to choke each other in the 1850s and still choking each other in the 2024s, is good. And what I would say to you is, as it relates to institutions, you're going to have them, and everything you're saying about them is true. But this is a country of entrepreneurs and risk takers. So you have that going on, and then you have the Davids out there with the slingshots. You're a David with a slingshot. I'm a David with a slingshot. And so we surprise people. We've seen people like you and me. If we go in that direction, we can create this, right? Like Larry Page and Sergey Brin, there were internet search engines before they arrived on the scene. They just created a better one. And they were a little tiny company, and they became one of the biggest tech institutions, $1 trillion company in the world, right? So that's America, right? And so like Lee Kuan Yew, the prime minister, who was a big institutionalist, by the way, the prime minister and founder of Singapore, one of the richest city-states, one of the richest nations per capita in the world. He took a swamp at the southern tip of Malaysia, and he turned it into an oasis. And some of it was institutional, some of it wasn't. But he had something brilliant to say about America. He said, don't bet against America, because people want to be American, and they can come from anywhere in the world. They can come from Italy, become Italian Americans. They become from Japan, become Japanese Americans, and they can assimilate into the culture 3, 4, 5 years later. They're American. That was my grandparents. But you can't do that in other countries. You don't go to Germany, become American German, or Japan and become American Japanese. You don't do that, but you do it here. And so this is this Petri dish. This is this unbelievable magnet for resources, intellectual capital, et cetera, right? And so, yes, everything you're saying is true. I'm not saying it isn't, but where I would differentiate is, while the institutions, it's okay to be cynical about them, there's a Petri dish of opportunity in America that drives America forward. And by the way, talk about policy, because it does affect everything. You see, I think the Trump tax cuts actually hurt America. You say, well, what the hell is he talking about? Because what was embedded in the Trump tax cuts was the SALT limitation, the state and local income tax limitation. So if you live in a blue state, which is a high tax state, you were able to deduct your income taxes to the state, and then on your adjusted gross income, you paid the income tax to the government. But now you're only allowed to deduct $10,000 worth of that, right? And so what happened was, whether it's California or New York, millions of people left those states to move to states that didn't have those income taxes, right? And so why is that important? Well, the blue states, the port cities, and they became blue states for a reason, Jeff, because you've got poor people coming in, teeming immigration into these port cities. And so the politicians in those blue states said, okay, wait a minute, I got to have a safety net, otherwise we're going to have anarchy. And so they built these high tax systems, but also created these safety nets. But these safety nets led to great economic innovation, because the Sergey Brins that showed up from Eastern Europe, they were poor when they got here. And they needed help with public schooling, and they needed help with public health and safety. And so I mean, I don't talk to Trump anymore, but when he did that, and I talked to him in December of 2017, I said, it's a mistake. Because what you have to understand is those port cities, like whether you like the red states and you don't like the blue state, whatever, they're all connected. We're a purple country, whether we like it or not, and we feed off of each other, okay? And you needed it. And so when people say, well, I don't need to give a shit about politics, I'm just going to focus on my business, trust me, the politics is affecting your decision making. And let me put it very simply to people. If you're in a high tax state like I am, my incremental dollar, 52% of it goes to the government. So I'm now a minority partner in my own business, right?
You're in New York, right?
I'm in New York. So Eric Adams, Kathy Hochul, Joe Biden, they get the largesse of my economic output. I'm a minority partner now. They get 52 cents. I get 48. And so, I would tell people, I got to get involved with the hiring decisions. If those are the people that are getting my money, I got to get involved with the hiring decision. But it's a very complicated thing. So as I've gotten older, I used to be very black and white, but I'm not anymore, because I have been humbled by life. I've been humbled by good and bad decisions. And I now see it differently today at age 60 than I did, say, at age 30. And I'm just telling you, it's a very complicated thing. And so a lot of the things that you're saying are right, but the reason why you never bet against America is that there's some kid right now, he's arrived here with his parents, and they are elated. They cannot believe their freedoms. They cannot believe the potential and the opportunity here. And they're going to invent something that we've never seen before.
Yeah, I think there's a few things in everything you just shared that I want to touch on. I totally agree with you. I think what's bizarre to see is, at least the way it's portrayed perhaps by, certain media elements, is that there actually are large swaths of Americans betting against America right now. And that's, it's like this self-loathing is I think existentially just bizarre and probably troublesome. You also mentioned, people teaming in through the ports. I think one issue that I was, I would say prior to this episode, I've always been like, oh, no, don't go there. But like, actually, now that I'm sort of ripping this Band-Aid off, I actually really want to try to understand, seek to understand is they're not just teaming in through the ports now, they're teaming in across a 2,000 mile theoretical line that's supposed to exist between us and Mexico. And there's one spin to that narrative that's basically like there are forces in the world that seem to have some representation internally here that are actually rooting now for America to lose. And it feels like they've somewhat infiltrated us. And that's just a feeling. I'm not saying I even have that viewpoint. I'm just articulating it as something that is out there in the world. And I'd love to get your take on, like, has something fundamentally new and insidious taken root in America that's different than perhaps ever before?
Okay, so it's a longer discussion, and I don't want to be overly existential, but let me just address the border for a second. Okay, the border is a real concern for everybody, and we did a couple of things from a policy perspective that exacerbated what's going on at the border. And so if I use the medical analogy, if I take the cholesterol medication, my arteries may stay clear. I may not need the bypass, right? So for a pill that's maybe 50 cents a day, I can avoid the $400,000 triple bypass surgery at the hospital, right? So what we were doing as a country is that, okay, we have very poor people in Central America and in the Yucatan Peninsula primarily, and if we send U.S. aid, USAID to those countries, and we help those people find jobs and we help them build schools, they'll stay in the country. They won't leave. Okay, so that's the cholesterol medication. If we cut the aid, because we decide, hey, America first, let's cut the aid. And by the way, this isn't Donald Trump's decision. This was made in the 80s, by the way. We cut the aid. And so we created a run on the border. So now the economic situation in these countries are so horrific that the people are running for the border with young babies because they're trying to get out of the economic situation that they're in. You have to think about the desperation that would cause a mother with 2 young children barefoot to run 800 miles towards the American border. Okay, so now you can say, well, that's not our business. We should let them rot. But you can't let them rot because it's like what FDR said, we have to have a good neighbor policy. Okay, and a good neighbor, and if you just look it up, that's what FDR's policy was. We're going to fortify and help these people so they don't run at the border. Now, the other issue with the border is what Milton Friedman said, the conservative economist. If you have a welfare state, you have to protect your border. Because if you don't protect your border, market forces dictate that people are going to run across the border and participate in your welfare state. The United States does have a safety net. It has a welfare state. But contemporaneous to all this, so number one, we should be putting the $2 billion a year of aid into those countries instead of having a $25 billion a year problem at the border, and then all of the issues that we have now with the immigration and all the issues we have in the economy related to it. We're not doing that. But the second issue is the politicians. We've allowed the politicians to create an oligarchic duopoly. Okay, and what do I mean by that? They got scared by Ross Perot in 1992. They said, we're never going to have a third party. But for all these legal restrictions up and all these barriers to entry to prevent the Bobby Kennedys of the world, or you pick the third party to ever emerge, there's going to be a duopoly, Republicans and Democrats. We're going to do that. Second thing they're going to do is we're going to hammer down the gerrymandering. And for your viewers and listeners, just quickly, what that is if I control my congressional district, I use the district rezoning to screen out my enemies and include my pals. And so through gerrymandering, I can preserve my position in Washington. And so the Congress has a 14% approval rating, but the actual individual congressman gets reelected 98% of the time, the incumbent. The only time they leave is when they say, okay, I'm retiring from the Congress. Okay, so we've created a system now where Nancy Pelosi, 40 plus years, Chuck Rangel, I mean, this guy, I think he's George Washington's great-grandfather or something like that. He's been in the Senate, I think, before the country was formed. And they don't leave, okay? And they stay there, and they've created this sclerosis in the system of indifference. They're not working for the American people anymore. They're just serving their own personal interests, and they're feeding their own egos and their own personal power. And why is this important is that the American people want an immigration deal. The American people want a border control solution. Okay, Joe Biden made a very big mistake. He reversed the executive action that Donald Trump took at the border. He did that because he wanted to be anti-Trump. It caused a flood of people at the border. He's now reimposed some of that executive action. He went to the Congress and said, okay, you conservatives, I'll agree with everything that you want. Donald Trump said that the conservatives don't approve that. I need to make the border a big deal for the election. And even though that's a good deal, I don't want you to approve that because I got to be able to say that the border sucks. Is that serving the American people, or is that serving somebody's own interests, right? And by the way, they're both bad. I'm not saying one's worse than the other. I'm indicting both. So I just want to explain what is going on to your viewers and listeners. So now you got the situation. The border, believe it or not, we're down 40% on crossings in the last 6 months. It has to do with the new woman that's running Mexico, the president of Mexico. I'm forgetting her name. I'd have to look it up. She is helping us, okay, and she's slowing down the traffic. And some of the things that we've put in there are helping. But this is a typical problem that's not getting resolved by the politicians because they don't have any incentive to resolve it because they are in power. Whether we want them to be in power or not, they have figured out a system to create this oligarchic duopoly. So, and we have to bust that, by the way. Yeah. So we need entrepreneurial politicians and political leaders to explain what I just explained to your viewers and listeners. Say, yeah, I don't like that. So we got to fix it. Before you say something, I'm going to ask you a rhetorical question, okay? There's 144 million people. They vote the exact same way in every single election. They're the most powerful voting bloc in the world. Who are they, Jeff? That's the non-voter, Jeff. The non-voter. They don't show up.
Wow. Okay.
Okay. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You only get 50% voter participation. The people that are eligible to vote, only 50% of them show up. Imagine an entrepreneur that could explain this to the people and get the other 150 million people to show up. You would break the system and you could cause the reform that the country is desperate for.
That's a powerful point that I'm going to spend some time chewing on. Yeah, I mean, I would say I think that's a fundamentally optimistic statement. You might say, oh, lack of voter participation is kind of a downer thing to talk about. But the reality is that's just a massive opportunity. Like you said, like this whole thing could be reset in one election.
You're an entrepreneur. Barack Obama, you could like or dislike him. He looked at the situation. He said, okay, I got this. The Clintons control the Democratic Party. Former president, she's a senator. She's got all the state houses locked up. All the Democratic governors are supporting her in 2008 to be president. They're not supporting me. But I'm going to create this whole new market of Democrats. Okay? And I'm going to add to the voter rules, and I'm going to think like an entrepreneur, and I'm going to go out there and market to a group of people that didn't vote before. And he crushed her.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, again, kind of returning to where we started, the sort of the auspice of this show is, you mentioned David with a slingshot. I'm trying to inspire more Davids to take up slingshots and basically shift the trajectory of the world back towards entrepreneurialism, back towards individualism, back towards at least a classical sort of libertarian consciousness, in the sense that, because I believe in the psychological adage that dependency breeds hostility, and that the way to de-escalate what we see happening in the world socially and culturally is to just empower the individual more to be less dependent and therefore less hostile. That's sort of, I guess, the broad premise here. And so I guess my question is, do you feel like it would be dramatic to say that there seem to be forces in the world or in this country that are almost thinking in terms of conscription? How do we draw people in to get them hooked into this lifelong dependency that is essentially a chain that starts with healthcare? I mean, we jab babies when they're 2 days old or whatever, and then it goes into the educational system, which is basically built on a debt model. And then it goes into the job model, which is built on a retirement model that's only about 150-year-old concept that is saying, oh, delay all the gratification of your life's work until the end so that we get all your best years. And then that hooks you into a financial services model or system that is built on basically a broken math equation that doesn't pencil out anymore. And that, frankly, unless somebody works in high finance like you, or gritty entrepreneurship like me, like, we're the outliers. We're the ones that do finish with some embodiment of the American dream, but that all the people that are actually going into the American dream the way you're, quote, supposed to, it's just a nightmare now. And there seems to be like conscious forces willing it to be so. Am I off my rocker conspiracy theorist here, or is that actually the state of the world?
Well, I don't think you're a conspiracy theorist with all of that. I think all of what you're saying is factual. So let me delayer a few of the things you're saying.
Okay.
Let's talk about the Davids with the slingshot. So what I would tell people, I found in my life that people that know they're going to die are the ones that are willing to take more risk. And so I know that sounds silly because we've had 100 billion people live on Earth, and God is bad at 1,000. He's taken every one of them. Okay, there's 9 billion left. But my point is, you're going to die. Get out of the denialism. Do what Marcus Aurelius would say, right? In momento more, in this moment I can die. The minute you think like that, go to Steve Jobs' speech at Stanford University in 2005. The minute you realize you're going to die, don't waste your time. Okay, actualize your life, dream about what you want to do, and then see if you can make it happen. Okay, that's the big message. Okay, and I would find that the Davids think like that. Okay, and they go hard And here's the beauty of what I just said. Even if you lose, that journey is glorious. And I have lost more than one time in my life, right? 11 days in the White House, fired. I got fired from Goldman. I got rehired into Goldman. I've had a couple of businesses I've had to shut down. I've had a couple of businesses that have grown spectacularly. But it's the journey that I think that the Davids will enjoy. And so in memento mori, that's that, okay? On the financial equation and the Ponzi scheme of the government, okay, which you're referring to basically, is that, the Social Security and the tax revenues are upside down and you can't chart it and it doesn't make sense. I'm going to put your mind at ease with the following statement, that we think linearly. We're designed chemically to think linear. That's our survival mechanism. If there's a woolly mammoth outside, it's going to eat us. Well, you know what? There's going to be another woolly mammoth tomorrow, okay? But what happens to us, though, is because of the brilliance of the human being, men and women, we're changing the world exponentially while we're still thinking prehistorically and linearly. So let me give you two examples. Example number one, Tom Malthus, 1840. We're going to die. Why are we going to die, Tom? Well, we're going to run out of food. We're growing the population exponentially. We can only grow the food linearly. We're going to starve. Well, he missed GMO. He missed vertical farming. He missed irrigation, new fertilizers, except we have more people dying from obesity than we do from starvation. Okay, let's go to peak oil theory. I'm 60. 35 years ago, 40 years ago, I sat in a classroom at Tufts University. The professor told me we're going to run out of oil. I said, we are, sir? Yeah. When are we going to run out of oil? 2010. We are? Okay, great. Oil is going to be priced at $2,000 a barrel. That's $1,985. Okay, wow, that's going to be a disaster for the world. Yes, it will be. We didn't run out of oil. GPS, geothermal studies, innovations like fracking. Now we have more oil than we know what to do with, right? So when we're looking down the barrel of a calamity, we can avert these calamities through our innovation and through our thinking. One more very big example. The New York Times said 15 years ago, the United States is screwed. The population is aging. We spend 20% of our GDP on healthcare. And because the population is aging, the 20 is going to 40. Well, they left out immunotherapy. They have left out new biomedical things. I just had my neck operated on. Somebody put a scope down there with a microscope and a scalpel, and they sliced into a nerve that opened up the nerve again, and I can feel my hand again. Okay, that's something they couldn't have done 10 years ago. They didn't even have the imaging to do that. I would have had to live with a partially paralyzed right hand. I don't have to do that now. And so what happened is, instead of going from 20 to 40%, we went from 20 to 14. You see what's happening? Mm-hmm. And so I hear the angst, and you're right on the current trajectory. People should be worried. But I'm telling you, we're going to out-innovate. We're going to do things to the world again that are going to surprise people in terms of our abundance. We could be sitting here with robots that are doing a lot of work for us, and while we have more leisure time, and perhaps we have more abundance than we originally thought possible. So I want people on your show to listen to you because you're a realist, but I also think you're a person that wants to unlock people's potential, and you're a person that likes to think about the big ideas. People need to be confident that we're going to solve our problems.
So I will say, I am like fundamentally so wildly optimistic and aligned with what you just said about human capabilities. I think that if you also look at the world through roughly this, let's call it a 50-year lens that you're talking about, some predictions that were made back in maybe the 60s and 80s, so maybe it's a 60-year lens, Malthus and so forth. Essentially, a small handful of human innovators have saved the world multiple times.
No question.
So like a small handful of scientists saved the world from running out of oil. A small handful of scientists saved the world from a starvation epidemic.
Pasteurization. How about vaccines? Pasteurization. How about penicillin?
And so my concern is
something. The person ate the mold, and he got cured from the strep throat he had.
Right. So yeah, I think my concern is that in order to preserve our legacy as a species, what we really need to be doing is empowering and inspiring a lot more of those, the candidates that could potentially become those small clusters of people that do unlock these innovations. And it just feels like we live in a world now that is telling kids not to think that way. That no, play it safe, focus on identity and other things that are fundamentally totally selfish and irrespective of the bigger themes and the bigger, problems we should be focused on. Focus on identity, but economically play it safe, go to school, rack up debt, buy into the system, get a job, and ignore all the signals that say, actually, that track doesn't work anymore. But it's like, it gets harder to change course the older we get. It's kind of the McDonald's theory. You don't need to market to everyone, just get them when they're young. And it feels like we're conscripting a generation right now into focusing on identity and not even ignoring, but just staying ignorant of the real issues at hand. And that one person that would have solved that one problem that's, would have headed off a calamity, that person never did that because when they were in school, they were actually told that entrepreneurship was too risky and they should stay the course, even though I actually disagree that statistically entrepreneurship at this point is any riskier than a more traditional life. I mean, all the data I see says that the only people that typically, or almost all the people that finish with the life that everybody says they want when they're young are the entrepreneurs. And yet we're just not telling the kids that story. So maybe you could kind of help me understand why it seems that the narrative doesn't align with the facts.
I mean, there's a lot there. So, and
I feel like it's a human nature conversation.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot there, but there's not a lot. No, I mean, the shortest answer I can give you to what you just said, there's not enough Jeff Lerners out there. Okay, because if there were more Jeff Lerners out there, what you just said would be more broadly disseminated. So I think remember, we changed the world in so many ways, but one of the things we did, we broke the media system. So now we have this fact. You're a beneficiary of it. I am. I have a podcast. You have a podcast, and so you and I are beneficiaries of this. But the flip side is there's no great universal messaging anymore. Yeah. If I could get you in front of 150 million people or 200 million people and say what you just said, that would be very beneficial, and it would help. It would help advance things. But we don't do that anymore. And there's a group on the right. They wake up in the morning, they say, okay, we have angry programming for angry older white people who are going to buy catheters and walkers from our commercial news interruptions. Let's piss them off today. Let's say there's a war on Christmas. Let's show them people on the border. Let's show crime. We've got to piss these people off today so they hate watch our shows. And there's a group of people on the left, and they're upset about, I don't know, I didn't use the right pronoun, or I said the wrong word to somebody, and they want to cancel me. And so they want to chant that to that fragment of the society. And they're both nuts, in my opinion. They're both completely nuts. But there's no uniformity anymore because we've been able through technology to micro slice what we like and what we dislike. And also they've got these big tech algorithms are reinforcing that, right? So if I tell you I like something, then they keep serving it to me. Or I may have a conversation with you right now, this phone's listening to me, and I may say, ba. Next thing you know, on Instagram, there's like 7 ice cream stores showing up.
So yeah, I guess I am asking sort of an existential question, like, are we at a moment where there's a perfect storm to create the exception to the otherwise optimistic fundamental assumption that we'll innovate our way through? That if you have this unique moment in time when you have a sclerotic political layer that essentially entrenches establishment thinking and diverts focus and energy away from innovation, intentionally or otherwise, mostly just, again, out of individual self-preservation instincts. And then you couple that with the inability for the masses to coalesce around a sane, centered message that would inspire the solutions to existing problems. Are we at this unique moment in time because of technology and the aging of the political system and, all the factors you're describing, where we actually are at risk that we might not get out of this?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, since the 16th of July, 1945, you've lived under the veil of that risk. Okay. And that of course, was the first atomic bomb detonation in Alamogordo, New Mexico. And so yes, I mean, the short answer to your question is yes. We have always had this existential risk because there's a self-destructive streak for mankind. And we've now figured out a way to create the sun on Earth that we could decimate ourselves, is possible. I mean, I'd like to be optimistic. We figured out over the last 80 years not to do that. I'm hopeful that self-preservation, people in love with their children or in love with their nephews or nieces or in love with the future, when they're forced into making these tragic decisions, hopefully they blink. That's clearly happened. I mean, I can tell you stories where there were Russian soldiers that there was a flock of geese flying and they thought for sure this was a nuclear attack, but they opted not to do anything. And thank God that they did not do anything. So yes, there's always going to be that threat. And yes, there's a confluence of events right now that can create enough hatred and enough tension. And we do have some political leaders on the world stage that are dehumanizing each other. And we know from World War II, when we start the dehumanization process, and we can create a lot of justified, which is of course unjustified, but we create a lot of justified killing. You can see tens of millions of people murdered who are innocent if you dehumanize them and you explain to the people, the willing executioners of those people, that they're not really human or they're this or whatever. I mean, it can happen. But the flip side of it is the fragmentation has also allowed for there to be a lot of doubt. So meaning I don't like the conspiracy theories. I don't like the post-truth elements of what's going on, but I also like the fact that there's a lot of messiness and there's a lot of doubt. Because if you have a lot of messiness and you have a lot of doubt, it's very hard for a whack job leader to take control of everything. You see what I mean? And so, think about the German propaganda machine, which is one of the most fascinating aspects of our modern day history, right? Modern day being defined as the last 100 years. These guys really had the German people believing certain things, many things which weren't true. And by the way, that propaganda machine was so successful that on the 8th of May, 1945, which was Victory in Europe Day, if you asked the German population, there were 60 million people killed. The entire country was destroyed. The country was literally burnt down to the ground. Millions of civilians, German civilians, died as a result of the bombings in Dresden, other places. And you said, well, what was Hitler's approval rating on the 8th of May? He was at 44%. Okay, so there was a group of Germans, no, we're for Hitler. Guy shot himself in a bunker. And so propaganda and disinformation is something that is a tool that can cause great harm. And so one of the things going on right now, thank God, is that there's enough decentralization of information that it's hard for somebody to do that now. That makes it easier in North Korea, it might be easier in Russia, but at least in the West, it's much harder.
Yeah, I think what probably concerns me is the apathy more than the aggression. I actually worry more about a future that's more like, Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, where everybody's just sitting around doped up by whatever turns out to be the Soma equivalent, which I don't know, maybe is just, such a optimized social media algorithm that people literally can't take their eyes away or something, right? That the political establishment or whatever force it is that I'm referring to, that they recognize that fundamentally dependency does breed hostility. That's like a human, axiomatic human truth. But, God forbid we set people free and we reduce dependency. No. Our power relies on that. So we just have to figure out a way to reduce the hostility. So let's just dope them up more and more and more and keep feeding kids these narratives that basically result in apathy or the red herring of identity as the focus, so that we just won't, as a population, be focused on even talking about the right problems, much less solving them. And I try not to have this, not to project this sort of like nefarious assumption about what's happening in the world. And maybe I'm asking you to kind of help talk me out of such a dire worldview, because that's just how it feels from where I'm sitting.
Yeah, I don't have a dire worldview. I got my money on mankind. I got my money on America. I put my money where my mouth is. I have my money on what I call the transformation towards abundance. If I'm worried about one thing, I'm worried about the haves not figuring out a market-based way to share with the have-nots. Because we know that socialism doesn't work, communism doesn't work, but we also know that we've got people with $200 billion. They don't need $200 billion. They're going to be dead. What the hell are you doing with $200 billion? You say, well, I built my company. I'm not saying they don't deserve the $200 billion. They do. But I want there to be unequal outcomes in a society, but I want the haves to come together and say, okay, how are we going to create a platform of equal opportunity for people? Because what I know, you give people a fair shake, they don't begrudge your wealth. If you're fucking people, excuse my language, and they don't feel they can get a fair shake, they're going to come after your house with a pitchfork and a tiki torch. Okay, so for me, I'm not a cynical person. I do believe that we can do this. I do believe there's enough smart people in our world, and there's enough people that love people. See, I am somebody that loves people. And so there's a great expression from my grandmother. I'll share it with you. My grandmother used to always say that, and she said it in Italian, and I don't speak Italian, so you have to forgive me, but I'll translate it for you. She used to say that the best among us, Jeff, the best among us choose not to judge human frailty so harshly. And so we need leaders like that. We need people that are like, okay, I'm frail, I'm imperfect, you're frail, you're imperfect. I'm not Mr. Arrogant where I think I should lord over you, but I want to help build a system where, yes, unequal outcomes, no problem. People should be direct beneficiaries of their ability to create and innovate. But we got to create a platform of equal opportunity so that the young kid that grows up, in a poor area, he's getting a good education, he has enough health care, he's got enough nutrition so that he can get to the starting block in his life and see if he can make something of himself. And so that's where I'm worried, because we have pockets of unevenness in our public education system. We have pockets of unevenness in our healthcare system. And we have to figure out a way to resolve those things. If we do, you'll see and you'll feel less angst in our society. People will look around and say, yeah, I'm not rich like XYZ, but you know what? I got a real big shot here to make it because of the way I've been educated and the way I've been. And by the way, I'm a beneficiary of this. I grew up in a blue-collar environment. My father didn't go to college. He was an hourly worker. He was in a union. But I'm a great beneficiary of a phenomenal public school system out on Long Island that enabled me to get educated enough to go to Tufts and then to Harvard Law School, and then out into the world to make a living.
Hey there, it's Jeff. So real quick, I want to let you know about my text message community. I use text messages to provide unique value to the Unlock Your Potential community. These texts could just be random thoughts. It could be letting you be the first to know about an event I'm planning, maybe giving an update on a special I'm running or some free training that I host for my community. Anyway, just shoot me a text to get subscribed to the list. The number is 702-996-3926. Again, that is 702-996-3926. Let's get back to the podcast.
I want to maybe sort of asterisk what I said earlier about my dire worldview. Again, I'm an optimist. I will vote on humans. I'm just trying to keep the path from where we are, or I say trying to keep. I guess I'm trying to do my part to make the path from where we are to whatever the new homeostatic reset looks like, because these forces aren't going to, they will resolve themselves one way or another. I'm just trying to make that path as peaceful as possible, or do my part, that it doesn't actually come to, a flipping revolution. And so there has to be some sort of not just optimism about the outcome, but optimism that the current technologies, and I heard an interview you did where somebody defined politics as essentially a technology of compromise. It's a technology that enables people with strongly held viewpoints to compromise with each other, that technology still works.
I remember that interview, and what he also said was it's the substitute for war. So of course we're going to kill each other verbally. We're going to have politics as opposed to taking sticks and stones and throwing them at each other.
Yeah. So anyway, I just want to be clear. I'm just advocating that, you know, if we can get these ideas out into circulation, we can sort of de-escalate what it's going to have to take to get to the reset. So, listen, we're coming up on time, and I want to give you a really fair shot here to talk about. You have a book, From Wall Street to the White House and Back, that you have obviously a fascinating story. I have not read the book, but I've read some of the reviews. You have reviews from Arnold Schwarzenegger, Chris Cuomo. Obviously, it sounds like a riveting book, and I've, for my audience in particular, it's not just a book, from what I can discern, about sort of these macro concepts, but there's a deeply human story at the center of it, named Anthony Scaramucci, who's probably failed like the rest of us and overcome a lot. So maybe you could take the last few minutes here to talk about your book.
Well, I appreciate you bringing up the book. I've written a couple of books. I wrote this book not to be anything more than lessons. I just turned 60, so here are 25 lessons and observations that I've learned from my business career, my ill-fated political career, my family and relationships. And I wrote them down. Obviously, I'm a big lover of Marcus Aurelius and the world of Stoicism. And so I just said, you know what? I'm going to write down my personal observations. So it's not a chapter book, it's a lesson book. So you could open it up anywhere in the book and you could read that lesson, and I tell a story. I tell a story what happened to me, or a calamity, or, in the last 7 years, I've been fired from the White House. I sold 30% of my business to Sam Bankman-Fried, who, if you're not in the crypto space, you may not know who he is, but if you are, he went to jail for 25 years as a result of fraud. He was a young kid, rising billionaire, had a great business, by the way. It was a crypto exchange. He had 12.5% of the crypto markets. And he was a brilliant young man, but he was malevolent, and he was taking client money and putting it into his personal account. He got caught doing that, and he ended up going to jail, but he was a friend of mine. And so I, obviously, I'm not embarrassed to admit this. I adored him, and I sold him a piece of my business, and I was going to mentor him and help him grow his business, but he didn't have the right morality. And so that's an embarrassment for me. That hurt my reputation, hurt my business. And so I talk about that. So in the last 7 years, I got fired from the White House. I sold a piece of my business to a fraud, but I'm still here. Okay. And I'm still doing very well, knock on wood. And why? Well, and I write about why. Number one, you have to operate with integrity. You have to be honest with people. You have to also be vulnerable. I think that when you're vulnerable in life and you tell people the truth, as opposed to the glazed over version of the truth, people appreciate you more because they have their own struggles. They're going through their own issues in their own lives. And so I wrote a 25 lesson book, which thankfully, people, it caught a little fire earlier in the summer and became a bestseller. And, if you pick up the book, I think you'll open the book, you'll like elements of it, I think, because it's real and it's vulnerable. And I also read the audio version of it. For some reason, the Amazon editors decided that there was humor in this book. And so it went to the top. It was number one on business humor for about 2 months. And, because there was some funny shit in the book. And a lot of the shit are jokes on myself. It was like shit that I did wrong and some embarrassing situations that I put myself in. But if you're an entrepreneur and you read the book, you'll see yourself in the book, because you'll see tribulation and mistakes and courage. And I've got 5 children, Jeff. I didn't want to write a book where, hey, your dad did everything right and he had a great career and it went up into the right. That's not my career. My career did this, And I want to provide space for my children to see that they too can make mistakes and they too can have public humiliation and they can survive it. That's the lesson of the book.
Well, it sounds like a wonderful read. I'm glad to hear there's an audio version. That's how I consume most books these days. So I'm gonna download it, and I'll be you can add one to your
if you read it or you listen to it, you let me know what you think.
I will for sure. I know we're technically out of time. I'm wondering if you're open to, and I realize it's awkward to ask you this publicly, but are you open to? I feel like there's going to be there is a demand from the audience right now, just because of the world we're in, for people that have had up close proximity to Donald Trump.
Yeah.
To kind of tell us what's true and what isn't. And obviously you guys, had some hiccups in your relationship, but I mean, are you open to maybe a 2-minute coda here of like candid thoughts about Donald Trump, the human, as that seems to be a very important question?
Absolutely. Sure. Listen, I had a 20-year interaction with him. I'm not going to say it's a relationship, because anybody that thinks they're Donald Trump's friend, they don't understand the relationship. So if someone comes on your show and says, "Hey, I'm Donald Trump's friend," like, okay, they really don't understand the relationship, because he doesn't have any friends. He's a very transactional human being. He's very self-absorbed. He's got a couple of family members that he spirals through love, hate, drama with, but it's really about Donald Trump. And so, and that's it. And he's done a great job of getting his name out there. He has 100% name recognition. He had a very famous television show. He obviously went on to the presidency. He's got great political instincts. He's an incredibly charming person. So if you meet Donald Trump, he could be blasting you on Twitter, and then you could run into him and you're in his proximity. He's going to be very charming and very gregarious towards you. He doesn't like conflict. He's not a conflict person. He's more of a internet bully than he would be in your face sort of a bully. And he's captured something that is going on in America that a lot of people feel. And the reason why I worked for him in 2016 is that I'm from the area of the world that he's captured. And I'll just tell the story quickly. Donald Trump saw that there was a group of blue-collar people, my dad, who were aspirational. Okay, my dad was a blue-collar, hard worker. I grew up in an aspirational blue-collar family. My son's going to go to college. He's going to make something of himself. He's going to live the American dream. And so over a 35-year period of time, I'm not blaming anybody, but over a 35-year period of time, blue-collar aspirational in the United States became blue-collar desperational. And people felt that their children were not going to be better than their parents or their grandparents. And, was it global trade? Was it offshoring manufacturing? Was it NAFTA? Could it have been the World Trade Organization deal with China? Whatever it was, the people in America, is a very large group of them that have feel left out of the social contract.
And by the way, that's a statistical truth, not just a perception. I mean, intergenerational mobility has reversed now.
It has. And so Trump, whether you like him or dislike him, he understood that. These are people that would have voted for Lyndon Johnson or Jack Kennedy, or their grandparents or great-grandparents would have voted for Roosevelt. But the Democratic Party left those people. The Republicans, frankly, were never with those people. They were more with the corporations and tax breaks and, that sort of thing. But Trump saw it. And so you can like or dislike Trump, but he's identified a group of people in the country that feel left out. Weirdly, it's the same group of people that like Bernie Sanders. I know that sounds weird because they have different policy approaches, but they are the same group of people. I went to more than one Bernie Sanders rally in 2016 to understand this group. And so Donald Trump understands it, and Donald Trump is perceived by that group of people to be their advocate, a result of which he can shoot somebody, to use his own words, on Fifth Avenue. He can be a convicted felon. He could do a whole series of different things, foment an insurrection. He could steal documents from the White House. It doesn't matter to this group of people. They're with him because they feel like he's their last hope. And they don't like the system, and they see him as an orange wrecking ball that could smash into the system, burn down the system, And so the system's not working for me. So let's burn it down and let's see if we can create something that will work for me. That's the messaging. And that's what he's living on. But the great irony of him, he didn't do anything for those people. 4 years in office, he gave tax cuts to his rich friends. I was a beneficiary of that, although he hurt the blue states with the income tax, state and local income tax deduction. But the bottom line is he didn't do anything for those people. We went into COVID. He has very poor executive management skills. You can see that as evidence into the Trump organization. He's a great raconteur. He's a great communicator. He had an award-winning, very successful 15-year television show because that's his skill set. He's entertaining. He's gregarious. He can speak to a group of people in a way that they get, and they like him. But he's not a great executive manager. You have 5,000 people that work in the executive branch of the government, 14 million people that are somehow part of that government, either as permanent employees or licensed contractors. So it's the largest, most powerful entity in the world, the United States government. So you would actually need a business executive to oversee that government that has executive management skills. He doesn't have those. And he's prone to bullyism. And he's prone to, he doesn't share credit. He's prone to egocentrism. And these are big weaknesses in his personality. And so the other thing he does is he alienates people that are natural allies of his. And so he's got a very large group of Republicans that will not vote for him under any circumstances. That would include me. I got fired by him in July of 2017. No problem for me. I'm a big boy. I stayed loyal to him until 2019. I said one thing on the Bill Maher television show that he didn't like. He started attacking me on Twitter. But I had given him $1 million, hundreds of hours of media advocacy, worked for him, got fired, didn't say a word, stayed loyal for 2 years. Then he starts attacking me because I said one thing he didn't like. Bill Maher said to me, well, you were 7 for 8 for him tonight on the show. You got to go 13 for 10, which is, of course, mathematically impossible. And so he started attacking me. Well, I don't know. Your viewers and listeners will draw their own conclusion. I am not Ted Cruz. If you're going to attack me and you're going to attack my family, because that's what he did. I think when he attacked me, I laughed. I said, so said the fattest president since William Howard Taft, because I know he hates being so fat. And then he attacked me again. And then I was like, I hit him again because I'm a New Yorker. I'm not going to take his bullshit. And then he started going after my wife. So when you're attacking my family, and I'm an Italian kid from Long Island, you're not allowed to do that. Okay, so I will square off against him every day of the week, all day. And he's just, to me, he's a bad guy. He's a bad human being. And he's a malevolent guy. And so that's me. And I understand why people like him. And I understand certain policies that they like. But he also wants to burn the place down. So just remember that, okay? If he loses the election, which I predict he will lose the election, he'll say it was fraud. He fomented an insurrection last time on the 6th of January, which is ironically and coincidentally my birthday, and he'll do it again. And so this is not the type of guy that's in love with the American ideas, the American idealism. He's a very egocentric, very self-absorbed guy. He's a little bit of a mean guy. He's a little bit of a bully. And so I don't want a bully to be president. And so I'm going to speak out against him. I'm supporting Vice President Harris. I'm a lifelong Republican, but he's just somebody that wants to wreck the system that my family, your family, and so many families have been direct beneficiaries of. Do we need to improve the system? Yes. Do we need to make our union that's imperfect more perfect? Yes. We don't need to burn down the system. So that's my 2 cents on him. But here's the bottom line. People say, oh, you took it personally that he attacked your family. You're fucking right, I did. Okay, you are fucking right that I took it personally. Let me tell you something. You better take it personally. Because if he's coming after your family, you better back up your family members. Okay, and that's what I would do all day long. Okay, and so he's got a mortal political enemy in me, and I will give money, time, media advocacy. I will go into the swing states and campaign to see Trumpism defeated with the hopes that the center-right coalition that can be created post-Trumpism, it may not look like the Republican Party of Ronald Reagan, but it'll be a less angry, less divisive party, and less hate and splintering and white supremacy and all this nonsense that Donald Trump represents. So you probably asked for more than, you probably got more than you wanted by me answering that question.
I'm grateful. I was giving you 2 minutes to be respectful of your time, but I'm grateful for.
But don't come after my family, Jeff, because I'm Italian and we don't like that. And I'm not Ted Cruz or these other shadrules like this guy Brian Kemp. Trump's going after his family. He's like, Roof, I still support you. No, you don't do that. You got to be a man about things.
You know, one of the things I'll externalize my perspective. I haven't figured out who I dislike less, Kamala or Donald. That's all this is for me, is just a referendum on what level of personal distance.
Yeah, well, she's a traditionalist. She's a little bit farther to the left than I would like, but she's not going to blow up the system, so that's fine with me. You got an arsonist and a bomb thrower that wants to blow up the system that's made you and your family successful. So I'm not going with that. I'll fight that every day of the week.
I'll share sort of something I've really gotten some clarity on lately, and then we can wrap here. Is, you know, I fundamentally believe we need an entrepreneur in the White House. We need somebody. I mean, you talk about executive management. I want somebody that knows how to run, like you said, the largest and most powerful, basically, business organization in the world.
That's not him. He has no executive management skills. And just remember this, when you're evaluating these two people, there are 40 people that were in his cabinet, and there are 40 senior people, including his vice president, that was on the ballot with him. He said, under no circumstances would I support his return to the presidency. It was not just me. And those 40 people, when you get them in a group, they say, yeah, this guy had absolutely no executive management skills, and he was doing heavy damage to the American people and to the American government due to the unpredictability and the broad-scale mental illness of his personality.
Well, and the point I was making is, I think we have to start to get a little, I actually think generally most Americans would agree, yeah, we should have someone who's got great executive management skills and probably business success to their credit if they're going to run the biggest business in the world. But I do think we can get a little more nuanced, because I've been like, well, what about that isn't Donald Trump, independent of having any personal experience? And I think it comes down to, it's really what we need is somebody who's a good long-term sort of stakeholder-minded business leader. And that is very different from somebody that makes billions of dollars doing sort of these intense short burst transactional development deals. Like, being a big commercial real estate developer is very different from, say, being Jamie Dimon, who's running Chase Bank for decades. Like, they're not the same thing. And that's where I think the public can be a little more artful in their perception of what type of entrepreneur, what type of business person, rather than just like, oh, he's a billionaire, so he must know how to run a business. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I'm with you. But listen, these are popularity contests now for the American people. This is not a hiring decision. We don't say, well, here's the list of qualifications, here's the resume, here's the other jobs that they had that they were successful at. This is, okay, who can best somebody in a debate, who has better memes and who has more likes on Instagram and X. This is not a hiring decision. It's not like we're bored sitting around, right?
Right. Well, there we go. We've officially gone where this podcast has never gone before. Anthony, I really do want to ex post facto try to respect your time. Here we are over it. Thank you for being a guest on the show.
It's my pleasure. I appreciate you giving me the time, and best of luck with the show, and congratulations on all your success.
Yeah, thanks so much. And to all you viewers and listeners out there, you know what I'm going to say. You, even when Anthony's on, are the best part of this show. You're why we do it every time. Take care. We'll see you next time.
If you loved that episode, then you're definitely going to love this one. Check it out.
When I started, I found that other content creators were very stingy. They did not want to share their secrets. They did not tell you the real truth of what they did. I decided to give everything I knew away for free in little videos every single week, because if we don't tell people what works and they go try it, they'll never trust us.